Good evening, everybody. I hope that everyone can hear me and that you guys are having a wonderful day. And I wanted to go ahead and invite you virtually to this Bay Area Science Festival talk with NASA's Ames Research Center. We're located in Silicon Valley, and this is in celebration of the International Space Station's 20th anniversary. I'm your host, Danielle Carmichael. So November begins the 20th year of continuous occupation of human presence living off the planet aboard the International Space Station. NASA and its partners have successfully supported humans living in space aboard the ISS since Expedition 1 launched on arrived on November 2nd, 2020. So that means anybody under the age of 20 has never lived in a world where we haven't had humans in space. So this is truly a global endeavor with the unique microgravity lab has hosted over 240 people representing 19 countries, almost 3,000 experiments from over 4,200 researchers representing more than 100 countries and a variety of international and commercial spacecraft. But before we get to that, I want to talk a little bit about our center. So the Space Biosciences Center located at NASA Ames has a rich history of advancing space exploration by achieving new scientific discoveries and technological developments in the biological sciences. And so today I'm happy to have my friend and colleague join us. Her name is Dr. Yasaman Shirazi. And so before we get started, I just wanted to remind you that we will be taking questions at the end. So please feel free to add those questions into the chat box. And I'm going to go ahead and pass this along. And I want to introduce Dr. Yasaman Shirazi. She is an International Space Station mission scientist in rodent research. Her area of research focuses on understanding the effects of the space environment, including weightlessness and heavy radiation, has on the skeletal structure and strength. Her research has a goal of reducing or preventing bone loss during spaceflight and recovery upon Earth. As a mission scientist for the Rodent Research Project, she works with the principal investigator teams to develop science requirements and take the research from the lab bench to the ISS and prepare experiments to fly. So thank you, Yasaman, for joining me, and feel free to take it away. I'm looking forward to hearing your presentation.
Thank you, Danielle. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for everyone who's joined and spending the evening with us. I'm going to talk briefly about what we do and why we do the research we do, the problem of osteoporosis or bone loss on Earth, and how we are aiming to resolve this issue in space. So I'll start with a slideshow. And please feel free to type in your questions in the chat, and then afterwards we can do more Q&A at the end. So as Danielle mentioned, I'm Yasaman. I have my degree is in mechanical engineering, and then my PhD is in biomedical engineering. However, my training in the last couple of years is in molecular biology. So what I would like to tell everyone is that you don't have to work in one area. You can move from one to the other. You can be an engineer. You can also be a scientist. You can also be a biologist. They're not independent of each other. So I'll start telling you a little bit about myself and how I got into the work I was doing, and how my path led me to where I am now. So all of us always have a passion in life, and mine. I started getting very interested in bone biomechanics because of my grandmother. So my grandmother was very close to us growing up. I always remember her having pain in her knees, or having issues walking up the stairs or sitting down, and it was always a topic of discussion in our family. Where are we going to drive so that she doesn't have to walk very far, or what are we going to do to make it easier for her? Well, when I was a teenager, she had a total knee replacement surgery. It was during the summer. And because it was the summer, I spent a week or two with her in the hospital, help her through to recover from the surgery, help her with her physical therapy and all that. And a couple weeks later, she was walking pain-free. And to me, that was amazing. You know, all my life, I've seen her have pain when she stands up, when she sits down, when she goes up the stairs. But then I thought, well, you know, whatever those surgeons did in the operating room in those couple of hours is amazing. That's what I want to learn. So that was always my passion. At the same time, I was always really good with structures. You know, growing up, I always built things. And naturally, when I went to college, I decided to be a mechanical engineer. Just because it came natural to me, I could understand everything, and I loved it. It just, you know, if I go back now, I would still do the same. And then this was one of the first structures that I built with my freshman engineering team. We built a bridge out of balsa wood, and believe it or not, this bridge that you see here held 893 pounds before it started cracking. Um, so that's kind of how my journey started, not knowing that, you know, a couple of days later, I'll be working next to the oldest and largest freestanding structure in Northern America. So this is Hangar 1 that is located at NASA Ames in Moffett Field. And, you know, every day I drive by this huge structure and I'm so astonished by how the structure is holding up and looking at all the struts and all that. Well, believe it or not, that's how the bones are. I mean, that's, if you look at a cross section of our bones, different bones in the body, our bones and the skeleton is built from little struts in the body. So let's talk about bone. What is bone? Why are we concerned about bone? So bone is a very rigid organ, but at the same time, it's adaptable, and depending on the different loads, it can, you know, get different forms or densities and all that. I mean, bones are efficient structures. They're lightweight, but they're also very strong. They serve multiple functions. If you look at, again, if you look at the bone closer, you can see there are blood vessels inside them. Neurons go through them. They protect various organs in the body, and they produce red and white blood cells and minerals, and they provide structure for the body, and they also provide mobility. Now, one of the bones in the body that is of very interest to a lot of people because of all the issues that come with it is our femur. So here we're looking at our thigh bone, or a femur. Some of you may be familiar with it, but if you look at the cross section of the bone, you see that different femur bones are different depending on the loading environment that they have. So the bones come in a variety of shapes and size, and then depending on the role they play in the body, they adapt to that. And same goes with what we do in our daily life. You know, if we exercise a lot, our bones form differently. As we get older and we're less mobile, then our bones deteriorate because they don't need to bear that much load anymore. Which brings us to how we can protect our bones, and, you know, what the diseases are that come along as we age. So one of the things that have been shown and proven to help build bone density is exercise. So high impact resistive exercise, dynamic loading on the bone has been proven to increase bone density and make our bones a stronger structure. As you can see, you know, we see that in athletes, and not even professional athletes, but anyone who works out on Earth, on the ground, but also our astronauts who are in orbit. So our astronaut crew work out 2 to 3 hours a day, combination of resistance training on the aeroid device and also aerobic on the Cobalt treadmill, as you can see here. And then that's how we've been able to prevent a lot of the bone loss that would happen in space for our astronauts. So here is an interesting example. There was a study at Stanford University a couple of years ago. They studied a group of professional tennis players. And then here we're looking at x-rays of the forearms of a tennis player. As you might imagine, the right hand is the dominant hand. As you can see, the bones are larger. You see more white there, so the bone is more dense than the left arm, which is the non-dominant hand. And if you look at the humerus, it's also the same. And then you can see the different densities on the edges of the bone. So the more loading you put on the bone, the stronger it gets, the higher density the bone has. But then the opposite also holds, and that's what we call osteoporosis. So osteoporosis is deterioration of the cancellous bone. So it happens for a couple of different reasons. I'll talk about a couple of them, but as we get older, or as or people with osteoporosis, this structure, this microarchitecture, the little struts that we talked about earlier, starts deteriorating. So these pictures show, a span of 6 to 8 years in someone who has osteoporosis, and you can see the stark difference between when the disease started and when the patient had osteoporosis on the right. And this is what we're trying to understand. This is what we're trying to resolve. So you might ask, why is osteoporosis a huge concern? Well, like I said, I knew it because my grandmother had it. I've seen it, in a lot of the elderly people in my family. But worldwide, we've got close to 9 million fractures every year. So about every 3 seconds, someone gets a fracture because of osteoporosis. And then if you want to look at it, 1 in 3 women and 1 in 5 men over the age of 50 will experience some sort of osteoporotic fracture. And nearly 75 of the fractures happen in people who are 65 years or older. And because of different reasons, genetics, other factors that happen in the body, this is more common in women than men by a factor of 3. And then just to kind of emphasize why osteoporosis is a huge issue, it's almost similar to cardiovascular diseases. I mean, the fracture risk is around 40%, which is similar to cardiovascular diseases and a lot of the other major diseases like cancer. So a lot of what we do is try to understand the disease and try to mitigate it by either pharmaceuticals, exercise, or nutritional supplements. And that's part of the research that we do at NASA Ames, and then just in the field of biomechanics and osteoporosis. So let's talk about how this happens. In our body, when we're all healthy, our body remodels and regenerates. More specifically, our bone remodels and regenerates. So think about the struts that we looked at in the previous slide and in all the other slides that I showed you. So we zoom into these little struts. These are called the trabecula in our bones. So on those trabecula, different populations of cell live. So the first group of cells called osteoclasts, they come in and they resorb the bone. So they basically create a hole in the surface of the trabecula. And then the next group of bones come in and they prepare the surface of the bone for regeneration. So they come in and then they prepare it for osteoblasts. So osteoblasts are the next group of cells that basically come in and build the bone. They fill in the cavities that the first group of cells created. And then once the osteoblasts fill those cavities, the next group, lining cells, will come in and smooth the surface. So this happens in a healthy person, this happens regularly. The activity of the osteoclasts are similar to the osteoblasts, and it happens regularly. And if it doesn't happen, that's when we have osteoporosis. So in patients with osteoporosis, the activity levels for osteoclasts are much higher than the osteoblasts. And this is where we have an imbalance of bone formation and remodeling. So how do we study this? I mean, we have a lot of patients that have osteoporosis, but then by the time they get it, it's too late to study them. So we want to understand it and prevent it. So we use different models. In this case, we use animal models, rats and mice. So in a lot of the research field, we use animal studies because they're valuable translational models. We can use them. They facilitate a lot of experimentation and application of techniques that are not feasible in humans. We can apply them to humans. They're also great models for accelerated aging disease. You know, we can use rodents, rats, or mice, depending on what we're studying, to study radiation, cancer, pain, inflammation, wound healing, immune functions. So there are a lot of different areas where we can use rodents to study the disease models or mitigations. And what we're doing here at NASA, and then with the project that I'm going to describe, is to maximize the science that we can do with these models, anywhere from whole model to organs to tissues to cell level. And we use different platforms, which we'll get to combine all these capabilities that we have. So the other reason that we use mice is that they are very similar to humans. So here on this first picture, we're looking at a young normal bone in a human. That's an average microarchitecture of the bone that we might get in a normal young human. Now, once that person gets osteoporosis, that's how the structure might look like. If we look at this in mice, you see that that's a very similar pattern. And that's why we want to use the mice, because there are components of rodent biology that is directly related to human, and we can use the rodent model to understand this biological process. The other aspect of it is the age range of humans versus mice. So a 3 to 6 month old mouse can basically model a 20 to 30-year-old human, and so on and so forth. So this is why we can use the mice or rats for longitudinal studies to look at aging, microgravity effects, radiation effects, disuse for a lot of the patients that are bedridden, or spinal cord injury patients who don't use their lower body, or any other diseases with hormonal changes and all that. So that's the other reason we use rodents. So now, why do we take rodents to space? As Danielle mentioned earlier, the International Space Station is a laboratory that took us about 18 years to build, but then and then we've been using it full force for the last 2 years. But then even, during the time we were building this station, we were using it as a laboratory. So it's an international laboratory. We work with international partners, collaborate with pharmaceutical industries or the national lab to do experiments on orbit. And it's an amazing capability that we have, because some of the physiological processes and changes happen a lot faster in space. So we're trying to scale down all of our studies to a shorter time. So we're using rodents to look at all the changes that would happen in 10 years in a human in a couple of months, and then we're taking them to space so that those changes are even more accelerated. And then in the space, as I was explaining earlier, it's not just bone that is affected. It's a lot of the other systems that is affected, and we're also studying them. So some of them are shown here. I'm not going to go into detail about a lot of them, but when astronauts go to space, there are changes in fluid shift and intracranial pressure, vestibular system, cardiovascular. All of those are affected. And we're using ISS as a laboratory to study these in different models. It could be anything from mouse to plants to cells to microbes and even smaller organisms. So what is rodent research on ISS? So we have a suite of hardware that we use for this experiment. These hardware are more than 30 years old. So they've been, these are the hardware that have been designed very efficiently, and we've been using them for the last about 30 years to get science. And a lot of publications and a lot of mitigations have been developed because we have these hardware and because we have this capability. And then we can do long duration research on the ISS, be it biomedical research or basic research. And this is a capability that is very unique, and a lot of the scientists worldwide are utilizing it. So rodent research or rodent spaceflight experiments, as I mentioned, have contributed to a lot of the capabilities and knowledge that we have. But some of them are pharmaceutical agents for osteoporosis or muscle wasting. There are a lot of other studies that are looking at the eye, the cardiovascular system, circadian rhythm, gut microbiome. Those are all the different things that we're studying in space using rodent research and using this hardware. So you might wonder, how does this work? So the hardware that you see here, we call them the rodent transporter, the rodent habitat, and then the one on the far right is called the animal access unit. And then basically how it works is that the transporter is just what it sounds like. It transports the mice from Earth to the ISS, to the International Space Station. The mice go in there. We can fit up to 20 mice in the transporter. They get access to food and water as much as they want. They can walk around. There's air circulation. There is lighting, so their sleep cycle doesn't get disturbed. And they're in there for a couple of days until they get to ISS. When they get to ISS, they go into the rodent habitat, and then the habitat is where they live for the duration of the experiment on ISS. It could be anywhere from 30 to 60 to 90 to over 100 days, depending on the experiment that we're doing and what we're studying. So the habitat accommodates up to 10 mice. So we want to give the mice a little more room to go around and make sure, they have the normal behavior that they do. They can run around, play, eat, sleep, all of that. Again, the habitats are designed so that we can watch the animals. There are cameras all around it. We can watch them, make sure the mice are healthy. In fact, we watch them every day, an hour a day. We can measure the temperature, percent humidity. Like I said, there is lighting in there, so we want to make sure the animals have a dark cycle when they are awake and active, and then there is a light cycle that they sleep. The mice are nocturnal, so that they're opposite of us. And then, with the animal access unit, we can attach it to either the transporter or the habitat to access the animals. And then the way it works is that, when the animals arrive to ISS, for example, in the SpaceX Dragon capsule, the crew member will go in there and grab the transporter, they open it and they transfer the mice to the habitat. In that process, they look at the mice, they make sure, they're all healthy, just similar to the astronauts. And then, we work with the astronaut crew. We train them how to handle the mice, how to change out the food and the water. The mice get fresh food every week, and, they get a replenishment of water every month. There's about 2 liters of water in their habitat. So they have plenty of food and water in there. Other capabilities that we've had throughout this process, and again, with each new experiment, we're adding new capabilities. So just like here, when you want to go and get an X-ray, we have an X-ray machine for the mice on orbit. So when we have long duration missions, we want to monitor the animals and see how they're doing during their stay on orbit. So there is an X-ray machine, there's a DEXA scan that has been developed by one of NASA commercial partners. It's been up there for about 10 years now. And we use it on a regular basis when we want to monitor the animals. But we also want to make sure the animals don't move during the X-ray. It's just kind of like when you go get an X-ray or an MRI, the doctor tells you not to move. So we also have an anesthesia recovery system. Once the mice are anesthetized, once they come off the scanner, we want to make sure they are warm and nice. So we put them in this machine so that they we maintain their body temperature until they wake up and they're active. One of the other things that I mentioned is muscle wasting in space. So when there is no load on the muscle and then when there's no weight bearing, you lose muscle mass. So one of the other things that we used to monitor the muscle function and muscle strength in the mice is this grip strength measurement. Again, this was developed by one of NASA commercial partners, and it's been used for the last couple of years for longitudinal studies on orbit. You might ask, how do you weigh yourself in space? Well, I don't think astronauts can weigh themselves, but we can weigh the mice. So again, we've worked with partners and we've built a very intelligent system where we can weigh the mice by just basically moving them back and forth and looking at the acceleration. And this is how we weigh the mice. We make sure they're healthy and they are not losing weight when they're on orbit. And then there are other capabilities that we have that for each specific mission, we work with our astronaut crew to train them. So for example, our astronauts know how to do injections, how to collect samples, or how, if we're doing studies where the mice have to get treatment, we train the astronauts to do that. And the astronauts are basically our hands and eyes on ISS, and they do the experiment for us. So as you might have imagined, working in microgravity is very different than we work in the lab on Earth. Now, some of you might have worked in a lab environment. You might have had science classes in school, and you know how you have, big benches, you've got a lot of space. And this is, when we do a spaceflight experiment, this is how many researchers we get in a room. But again, this is very nice because we have a lot of people, all hands on deck. We have all the instruments we want, we have all the space we want. But then when we do all this work in space, this is all the space that we have to work with. So a part of our job is also to work with the ISS and the people who have developed this glove box to see how we can fit all the instruments in there. And then this is where, we work with a team of operations specialists and engineers to make sure how we design, first of all, kits that are very small, but then also the kits that work in microgravity. Not everything works the same in microgravity as it does on Earth in 1G. So for example, think about pipetting. On Earth, it's very easy to pipette. You can just simply hold a vial, take out the pipette, and then dispense the liquid in there. Well, in microgravity, you can't do that because simply there's no gravity to pull the liquid down. So this is where we have to get creative and come up with tubes that would do that for us. Or design syringes that can operate in microgravity, and so on and so forth. So a big part of what we do is, we help investigators to do their primary science in space, but also we try to maximize the science. We work in, great detail to make sure how we preserve the samples so that when we can bring them back, couple of, hundreds of other scientists can use those samples because spaceflight samples are very valuable. And that goes for everything that is done on the station. Researchers use both similarities and differences between humans and rodents in our case, but then in a lot of the other model organisms that is flown to ISS. And then using those, we can gain insight into how our bodies adapt to different environments. The insight we gain from the science that we do on orbit improve our health and body on Earth for the Earthbound population, but also for the astronauts who are in lower Earth orbit aboard the ISS. But then as we are looking into going back to the moon and then eventually to Mars, we need to learn how our bodies adapt to microgravity environments. And that's a lot of what we're doing. And again, the knowledge and the expertise that we gain from doing experiments on orbit is limitless. And basically, this research is off the Earth, for the Earthbound population, as I mentioned earlier. So that's all I had. Thanks for listening. And Danielle, let's see if I have any questions.
Thank Thank you so much, Yasaman. That was such an exciting presentation. And again, I am a huge fan. I work in the the Office of Communications. So we have a really great opportunity to get to work with you and members of your team. But I'm here as a fan getting a chance to hear about your research. So people that are in the that are watching the talk, don't forget that you can ask questions in the Q&A portion that's at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So looks like we have almost 19 questions. So let's go ahead and move on to the Q&A time. So the first question that we have from Brennan says, can the ISS be moved to Mars or to the moon?
Well, the ISS as it is now, no. I mean, we can't move the current ISS to Moon or the Mars, but NASA has plans to build similar environments on the Moon and the Mars. The current International Space Station is designed to orbit the Earth. Now, if we wanted to go to Moon or Mars, we need different structures and different capabilities.
So Brennan also would like to know, what kind of spacecraft did you fly to the ISS?
That's a great question. So there are a couple of different ones. So back in the day, until about 2011, we had the space shuttle. So we had Columbia, Challenger, Endeavour, Enterprise, Atlantis. They flew astronauts and cargo to space. In fact, pieces of the International Space Station was carried on the space shuttle to be built and put together in space. And then since then, in 2011, we retired the shuttle fleet. And then we started working with commercial partners such as SpaceX, Northrop Grumman, to deliver cargo for us. So currently, we deliver cargo using Northrop Grumman rockets, the Cygnus or SpaceX Dragon. And as I'm sure everyone knows, we now have a Crew Dragon. So we did a demo mission a couple months ago that was very successful. The next Crew mission is coming up in November. So now we have a new way of delivering astronauts and cargo from the US. And then, up until now, our astronauts flew on the Soyuz from Russia with our Russian partners.
Perfect. So looks like C. Doley has a question about one of the photos that you had in your presentation. They wanted to know, what are the astronauts sticking their hands into?
So that is called the Life Sciences Glove Box. And basically that's what it sounds like. It's a box where we put everything on the walls, and there are different outlets and filters. And then we can modify it based on what's being done there. So it can be anywhere from life sciences to physical sciences to human research. And that's the beauty of it. It can be modified to different things. But we call it the Life Sciences Glove Box, or LSG for short. It's got 2 holes where they can put their hands in, and a second crew member can go in and from the side ports to hand in samples in and out.
Okay. So we have another question. Looks like this one's from Marion. She wants to know, is there an artificial substance right now that mimics osteoblasts?
So there are, and again, I'm not a surgeon and I'm not a medical doctor. What I'm talking about is just based on research. So there are some substances on the market that are trying to replicate what osteoblasts do. Most of the pharmaceuticals that are on the market basically stop osteoclasts for now, which is the key point. We need to also activate osteoblasts. And there are a couple of agents on the market that are in clinical trials, but scientists are working on it.
Certainly. So I want to jump ahead to some questions that we prepared ahead of time. So I just want to know, why is the ISS such a great importance to NASA's future space exploration plans?
I mean, as I mentioned earlier, ISS is where we've done a lot of science and a lot of research over the last couple of years, over the last 2 decades, and we've learned a lot from it. And as we are trying to go to the moon and to Mars, we need to learn how our bodies adapt to microgravity, and ISS is the perfect platform for it. We have a group of very qualified astronauts who are there, and we train them to do science for us, and we can't get that capability anywhere else. I mean, it's a multicultural, international laboratory where we get a lot of collaboration done, and again, the knowledge that we've gained from ISS has been valuable and incredible.
Okay, so it looks like we have another question. And I apologize because I do not want to mess up your last name, but they'd like to know, you said women have a 1 in 6 lifetime risk of a hip fracture. What is the lifetime risk for men? And what is the risk for astronauts who have spent a significant amount of time in microgravity?
I think for if I remember correctly, it's 1 in 3 for women and then 1 in 6 for men. If I the and again, people who are in the medical field know the statistics better. And then as far as the fractures in the astronauts, we haven't seen any fractures on orbit, and we haven't seen major fractures when the animals return to Earth. Because the animals, the astronauts take supplements, they work out a lot. So with the advanced resistance exercise device and the supplements that the astronauts take, we've been able to mitigate a lot of the bone loss that would occur in space for the astronauts. So luckily, we haven't had any fractures in the astronaut population.
Okay, so it looks like Marion has another question. She wants to know, what exercises on the International Space Station are the best that the astronauts use to help build bones?
So I think it's a combination of aerobic versus resistance training. And then each astronaut has their own exercise program based on the needs of their body. But then on average, the way it works out is that, each astronaut has about 30 to 45 minutes of running on a treadmill and aerobic exercises. There's also a bicycle up there, and then 1 to 2 hours of resistance training. So resistance training is more important to build up bone density, but also you need aerobic training to keep up your cardiovascular health in space.
So it looks like Nico Musavi has a question. They want to know, can the rodents be used to get data on their osteoliths to prevent sickness that the astronauts feel when they get back to Earth after being in space?
I'm not sure what that means. Can you repeat that question?
Can the rodents be used to get data on their osteoliths? And I apologize if I butchered that word, to prevent sickness that the astronauts feel when they get back to Earth after being in space?
I have to be honest, I don't know what Oculus is, but we do study the vestibular system both in astronauts and the rodents, and there are areas that we can translate what happens in the rodents to the astronauts, and believe it or not, it's very similar. There's always a short recovery time between when the mice or the astronauts return until they get their balance and vestibular function back, and it can vary from a couple hours to a couple of days.
Sounds good. So C. Doley would like to know, Do all types of creatures go into space? And if so, what has NASA sent so far?
Uh, well, I mean, not all kinds of creatures, but there are multiple of some types of creatures that have flown to have been flown to space. NASA has primarily flown rats and mice in the last decade or two. In the past, we've flown primates, but not enough for research. But then other space organizations, International Space Organization, they've flown zebrafish, newts, and other smaller organisms.
Okay, so Jessica Noble has a question. She says, has the mice ever received um, bisophenorates in space to combat bone loss? And if so, what are the results?
Not bisphosphonates particularly, at least not in the last couple of years. But there have been a lot of bisphosphonate studies done that has been funded by NASA. And then, it's very similar to what you see in the human population. Bisphosphonates do prevent bone loss, but as everyone aware, there are some long-term side effects of bisphosphonates that people have just kind of taken a step back on taking bisphosphonates. Long-term, they might cause atypical fractures, etc. So yeah, I mean, there has been similar to bisphosphonates and other compounds tested in mice in orbit. And some of the publications are coming out now.
So I actually have a question that's been pre-prepared. So part of your job here at NASA Ames is that you help researchers move their research from the research lab up to the International Space Station. How does that process work?
That's a great question, actually. So let's say a group of scientists come up with a science question. They write a proposal, they get awarded by NASA or a different organization, and they get selected to fly their experiment. And then that's when we come in. So we start working with the scientists to make sure we understand their science requirements, and then make sure we understand their science design, their experimental design. Once we understand all that, then we have to translate it to space, basically. We work with them to make sure what they want to do is feasible in the space, and this feasibility is a huge part of what we do. I briefly mentioned it when we look at the gloves box. We looked at the LSG, the glove box, and then the dissection tools, and then the sample processing, etc. But then we work with us scientists. Once we understand what they want to do, we start working with engineers to develop those different kits and tools to be able to do the specific science they want. We also work with operational specialists to make sure we can technically and physically get all of it done in the ISS. I mean, the ISS is not big. As you saw some of the pictures, there's a lot of clutter on ISS. So we want to make sure, if we are flying let's say an equipment like a microscope, right? Does it survive the launch load and the vibrations and the acoustics? If it survives all the launch loads, when it gets up there, is it compatible with the power outlets on the station? If it's compatible with the power outlet on the station, where are we going to put it? Where is it going to be fixed? We can't really fix anything on orbit because everything floats away. So there's a lot of little details that we have to do, and we have the operations team, we have the safety team. For everything we want to launch, be it chemical solutions, biological samples, we have to get through safety to make sure what we're sending up there is safe for the astronauts primarily, and then also safe for the environment that they're working in. And then, all of this will, come down to the astronauts. So we also have a group of trainers who, learn the techniques that the scientists want to do, and then they go spend time with the astronauts and then train the astronauts to do it. And this is the most impressive part because, a lot of our astronaut crew are not scientists. I mean, we do have, a lot of scientists on the crew, but, majority of them come from Air Force or Navy or other backgrounds. And these people are so impressively, capable of doing everything that, we teach them to do all kinds of science and then they do it perfectly. So again, that's a big part of what we do is that we train the astronauts to do the science for us. And then this is all before we launch the payload. So once we launch the experiment, that's finally the start of the experiment. So we have to monitor it and watch it when it's on orbit. Now, in case of us for rodent research, as I mentioned, we have to, watch the mice every day to make sure they are healthy, they're eating, they're drinking. We have to work with the crew members to when we guide the crew members when they do all the operations. We have a mission control room where we sit there and talk to the astronauts and basically guide them through the mission. And then when the experiment is done, we bring back the samples. We bring them home, and then we have to, work with the astronauts to pack the samples. Some of the samples are in the freezer. Depending on the experiments, the mice are coming back home live, so we have to go to the shore and receive the mice when they get here, and then work with the scientists to do the post analysis and all that. So a lot of this, I mean, it takes a village to do an experiment, and biological experiments is just one of the few hundred experiments that are being done on the station. So, the picture that I showed looks very busy, but ISS is also very busy.
Okay, and so speaking of the rodents, Ella wants to know, how do the rodents react to weightlessness? Do they enjoy it? And is it more work for them?
It's just like the humans. When you go to a new environment, it takes a little bit of getting used to. I mean, it's the same with the crew members. It's the same with the mice. When they get in space, it's a weird feeling because you're in microgravity, you're floating around, and then so when we watch the mice, we can see them that the first day or two, they're still trying to figure it out. But then after the third day, it doesn't even look like they're in microgravity. They're living their normal lives. They're running around, they're eating, they're chasing each other, and then they adapt really quickly. It's impressive how quickly they adapt. In fact, there is a paper. So our colleagues at NASA just published a paper a couple of months ago, earlier this year, or maybe late last year. So if you search for rodent research behavior, there is a video of mice in space included with that paper.
Okay, so we have another question. Jessica would like to know, how much bone loss do astronauts lose, let's say, in a month of being in space? And how has your research helped come up with those technologies and exercises that the astronauts do to help combat that?
That's a great question. So we started learning about bone loss in space with the shuttle program. The shuttle program, the missions were much shorter than the current ISS mission. So they range anywhere from 4 days to maybe 14, 15, 30 days. And then at the time, the exercise device we had up there wasn't really helping the bone loss. So back then, during the shuttle era, the astronauts would lose up to 1.5% bone density per month, which was significant. But then all the scientists here on the ground, at different NASA centers and different groups at academia, industry, work together to design a better exercise device. So now what we have there is called the ARED, Advanced Resistance Exercise Device. And then with the combination of ARED and the supplements and everything that gets done for each individual astronaut, we have minimized the bone loss for crew members. And again, I mean, these are very healthy individuals. The astronauts are some of the healthiest individuals on the planet. So luckily, over the last couple of years, we've minimized the bone loss in astronauts.
So it looks like we have a very interesting question from Nico. They want to know, aside from the thick sheet of lead, are there any technologies under development to prevent the astronauts from being affected by cosmic radiation and solar radiation?
So for ISS, I think and again, that's not my field. Uh, so take it with a grain of salt. But I mean, the ISS itself, shields the astronauts to some extent. The issue is, when the astronauts go out on EVAs, and that's, the if a solar particle event happens, that's the larger amount of radiation the astronauts would be exposed to. But I think the main issue for radiation is when we go to deep space. So, for example, Mars. That's the bigger issue when we're there. And I can't tell you who, but I'm sure people are working on it because we've been delivering rovers to Mars, and we're eventually gonna send humans to Mars. So rest assured, someone is working on a radiation shield. I just don't know who.
Perfect. We only have time for a couple more questions.
Okay.
Another question is, what type of supplements are taken by the astronauts to combat bone loss?
So again, that depends on individual astronauts, and again, because of medical privacy and to respect astronauts' lifestyle and all that, we're not privy to that. But again, it's a combination of alendronate, bisphosphonate, vitamins. So again, it depends. And then it's also a lot of astronaut preference. A lot of the astronauts don't like taking supplements while they're on orbit because there's no gravity, so it's hard to swallow anything hard. So again, it's very much dependent on individual astronauts. But it could be just vitamins, or it could be pharmaceuticals, or a combination of both.
So Kathy would like to know, does being in space make your heart pump differently?
A little bit. And by that, so when we're in space, there's no gravity. So all the fluid in the body shifts up towards our head and chest. So there's more fluid around your heart. So your heart has to work a little harder to pump all that fluid down and throughout your body. So yeah, it works a little differently. And, there is an adjustment period, but nothing that would cause problems. But it will have to work a little harder.
Okay, so it looks like we have another question. The attendees want to know, do astronauts sleep in space?
Absolutely, yeah. So astronauts do sleep. Each astronaut has their own. I don't know what they call it. They're not bedrooms, but then they're like kind of cubicles. They go in and strap themselves in Velcro. It's kind of like a vest, and then they strap themselves so that they don't float away. And then they sleep. And talking to some of them, they say that's the most restful sleep they get because they're just not attached to anything. But yeah, I mean, sleep is very important for a healthy human being. And then the flight surgeons and everyone who works with the astronaut make sure that they do get their full night's sleep.
So a couple more questions. Is there a way to get sunlight in space to gain vitamin D deficiency?
Not a lot of it, and that's why the astronauts do take supplements. But I mean, the ISS has a very small window, the cupola, that the astronauts love to sit and watch outside, but they don't get a lot of sunlight, and that's one of the things that the astronauts miss. When you talk to them, they say that they miss the sunlight, they miss rain, they miss like a real shower, and those are the things that they miss.
Okay, so since we only have about 5 minutes left, and we do have a lot of students that are in the audience, what's a piece of advice that you would give your younger self?
Don't get disappointed. Don't follow your dreams. It doesn't have to be something exotic. As I mentioned earlier, my passion was, it started as I, was watching someone very close to me. And there was a time. So I grew up in Iran, and Iran doesn't have a space agency. And for a long time, working for NASA wasn't a reality for me. But I never gave up. So that's kind of my advice to everyone: never give up on what you want to do, no matter what that is. And just work hard to get to it. And start with simple things. Start with the basics. You don't have to have a huge dream. You don't need to know what you want to do when you grow up. Just do what you like and you'll get there eventually.
Okay, so I wanted to thank you so much, Yasaman, for joining us in this conversation.
Sure, it was a pleasure.
Um, it's like I said, I am a huge fan, not only of our center, but also some of the amazing work and the contributions that we have gotten to contribute to 20 years of research aboard the International Space Station. So thank you so much, both to you as well as our attendees for joining in on this virtual talk. And if you're interested in finding out more information about the exciting research that goes on at NASA's Ames Research Center, you can check out our website, www.nasa.gov/Ames, or you can follow us through our various social media channels, including Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. So again, I would like to thank you for joining in on this conversation, and I hope that you all have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.